Hello, my name is Oluwaferanmi Owolabi, and today I'll be speaking to you about innovating education and how design thinking can become a catalyst for youth impact. So, growing up, I was partly homeschooled, word for the Nigerian child, and I loved to learn. And honestly, I enjoyed every part of it. Then, when I had to go to school, I hated it. And it's funny because now I'm the vice chancellor of a whole corporate university. But I've realized that my background differences and the methods of teaching that I was exposed to, the level of interaction, it had a lot to do with why I love to learn at home. And the difference I felt in school is that learning felt disconnected, felt constricted, it felt boxed. It was unreal. So I'll tell a little story about growing up and how I was able to understand the differences in my learning at home and the gaps in mainstream education today. So that's me, somewhere in the middle. Every morning, I woke up to a brand new storybook. It was annoying. I had to read it and summarize it. I had to write abstract pieces. I had to write about concepts I'd never heard of, and I was never allowed to research or check Encarta encyclopedia because there was no internet then. I was taught about feelings and empathy, and I was intentionally taught to let my mind wander. I had to do those weird, tiny little puzzles that will keep you on your toes day and night. And I was actually taught very strange things like how to care about people and how to have safe arguments. And it was intentionally taught to me by a full-time working class parent. But then there were gaps. So no, it wasn't perfect. I couldn't collaborate. I couldn't interact with other people or get their perspectives because I was learning by myself. And that's why I was partly homeschooled. So yes, I did go to school. But when I went to school on the other side, what I saw was teachers who told me exactly what to do and how to do it. They dictated and we copied. Or they would write on the board and you would copy. And then you will cram and then you will pour. And there was this fancy thing that would happen when you had a task and you got it wrong. It's called correction. You have to recopy everything the exact way they asked you to do it. And when things were difficult, they would tell you, this is the way, follow it. Almost as if they couldn't find another way themselves. So I would take my learning back home and my mom would re-gamify it. And then I would bring it back to school and I would be the one teaching my peers how we could play through it. And there were a few other people in my friendship circle who could relate. So we would find a way to create a balance. But all in all, what I saw was the teaching methods, the structure, the learning flexibility on the one side of learning at home, and the full blend of personalized learning and collaboration I now was able to bring from school gave me a holistic picture to education because I had the two sides of the story. And then I went through the next levels of life. That's me in secondary school, somewhere again in the middle. And Nigerian culture shock took me off guard. It taught me that my ideals were a utopia. They didn't exist. Because I honestly thought I was going to go there and learning would now be different. And it taught me that the influences of media, of standards, of communication, of interaction, can create biases that will make you question everything you know. Because it made me question everything I had learned. And then as an adult, I got very curious. And so I went to explore because I wanted to find that difference again. And I went further to learn principles that have now transformed my career and influenced my leadership and impacted my current approach to talent development and everything I do. But as I look back, what I see is those things I thought were absurd, things people called me weird for, are the reasons that I now have outcomes that people celebrate as different. They're the reasons that my outcomes are now being called outlier work. They're the reasons that my methods are now being called thorough, interesting, exploratory. What I didn't know at the time is I was already becoming a design thinker, and I had gradually started learning to innovate because I had learning approached to me from a very different perspective. And because of that, I became a talent development expert who could teach learning differently. And now I am a talent developer. I train young people all the time. I have social impact communities, and every time I'm in the learning environment, what I try to look out for is how they respond to the different types of learning. It's how they interact. It's how they relate to it. It's how they act when they've been taught. But what I see is I see them struggle to understand that curiosity is an active part of learning. Because they're waiting for them to tell you what to do. They're not waiting for you to teach them to think. They're waiting for an instruction and they want to do it the way you've asked them to. But then imagine being in a system where people are no longer passive recipients of their own knowledge, but they can actively create meaningful experiences. Imagine yourself being able to learn however you learn best. Music, songs, art, dance, sleep. Imagine a space where you can think creatively, where you can think critically, where you can collaborate beyond borders in your own classroom and solve problems. And now imagine our current system. Because our current system, it tells you the answer after asking you a question. It tells you to be better than the next person as the only way to go up, so you compete. It tells you not to work too closely to the next person because you're copying. It tells you and instructs you in a way that now forces you to build a learning dependence. And you suddenly think that there is only the one way in the book to do a certain thing. It tells you grass has to be green and the sky has to be yellow. And then it gives you a photocopy approach when it gives thousands of people in thousands of different schools the same test as a knowledge check to learn what exactly. But then you now take that learning into the corporate world, whether you're an entrepreneur or you're a corporate worker, and you're told not to compete. You're told to collaborate. You're told to build partnerships. You're told that relationship management is everything, and you now have to learn to talk to people. You're told that emotional intelligence is the essence of what you do, and that the corporate world is driven by creativity, innovation, disruption, fancy concepts. And you find that the things that you were not taught or not enabled to do while you were learning in school to become the person you have now been forced to be are the only things that will help you thrive and succeed in life. So how can we find this change with design thinking? Design thinking is a paradigm shift. It's not a theory, it's not a methodology, it's a mindset. It's an approach to life. And it means that you look at problems with empathy and with the highest levels of consciousness and connectedness. It means that you understand people for who they really are in their individual selves. And it means that you approach creativity with a new level of exploration and focus on a bias to action. So yes, design thinking focuses on the discipline of execution and getting things done, which means it looks for outcomes. It looks for real results, not copied answers. Now, if I try to link this context to education, let me ask a question here. We all had tea a few minutes ago. When was the last time you introduced yourself to someone, or maybe even there, and just talked about the YDX or Pythagoras theorem? Why didn't you talk about that when you walked in? Or when was the last time you went to the store to complain about the uprising economy and they explained the laws of demand and supply and diminishing returns to you right there, the cashier, instead of just telling you how you're feeling? And it doesn't invalidate those concepts. Those concepts are real and they work. What has happened is that we've learned so many core theories we can neither adapt or apply. And we can't do anything with what we learn. So what we learn and what we do are standalone. And that way we can't translate anything to impact or to output or to actions. And if we continue like this, the gap will always be there unless we start to unlock a new learning experience and open that experience differently. And that's where design thinking is, because it helps us understand where we are and how to build better ways of doing things. It helps us to look further. It helps us to see broader. It helps us to gain perspective that shape our progress. Its core principle of empathy helps us to recognize who every single learner is and what they need. It gives us an approach to designing learning and curricula in a way that it's not a one-size-fits-all. It's personalized for every ability group, for every age type, for every interest group. And that perspective gives us meaningful, valuable ways to move forward. And we have opportunities to reinvent education, to redefine the space. And we have an openness to ideation. And that openness in design thinking, or through design thinking, is where the magic really happens. I mean, we're all playing with AI, VR. Imagine augmented reality infused into learning. That is a rave that everybody would put their money into to play. What about the way we learn? It's a radical touch that will actually let people feel immersive learning in a safe space because it's augmented. So it feels real, but it's not. And it can take learning borderless. So you're in a classroom and you're learning with 20 or 30 people who only know so much. But think of borderless learning where you have access to the internet and you can grow learning beyond boundaries. And we have examples in our textbooks, the A, the B, the apple, the orange. But what happens to pulling a real-life problem from the news and seeing if people can actually take those concepts in class and start to make meaning from them? And then we can gamify our testing methods where people want to compete healthily and collaborate and help each other. But you can actually measure their growth because they're actively participating. Design thinking offers us that opportunity for the paradigm shift I spoke about. And design thinking is the reason that those methods of wholesome learning I spoke about earlier felt connected to me, made me different. But then to validate my thought process, because honestly, I really was curious, I ran a survey, just about 300 people, ages 13 to 24. And I wanted to see what they wanted from development, from learning. And in personality, I realized that they're restless, they're agile, and they're impatient. But the things that were priorities to them were authenticity, community, and care. And in authenticity, it spoke to independence. I want to do it. I want to try. I am unique. I'm not like you, and I can find it. But after I do that, I want to share it with the community. And I don't want to share it with just the next person to me. I want the world to know. And I want them to know quickly. And when I do that, I want responses to demonstrate that they care about me. I want my teacher to care. I want my immediate environment to. And that care translated to basic needs: self-belongingness, esteem, actualization. I'm sure a lot of people from some part of learning heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They told us food, clothing, shelter first. And after that, we move up. But after speaking to these young people, what I realized is that their need for belongingness, connectedness, actualization may actually make us want to rethink how we approach that hierarchy. Because that connectedness fuels everything else for them. So by embracing the principles as core life principles and building better habits, it is so much easier to infuse it into our daily lives and into our system. It is something that becomes a culture where we can readapt learning and transform education. And we can foster core skills that drive more meaningful and more sustainable impact. And we can connect the real world and its real problems together. And we can do this because we have access to limitless or borderless learning. We can bring back play, finally. And we can let people enjoy the experience. Because when you watch a movie, you remember. But when you read something, you forget. Learning is memories. And we can build more memorable experiences. So let's embrace the power of design thinking in simple ways. We can look farther and see beyond everything that we've been asked to see. And we can listen harder to the needs of everyone around us. And you can think with your heart, which is a little different. But it keeps us connected to a higher level of consciousness and the needs of the people that we're actually trying to build. And then you feel with your head so that you can get the logic and readapt it to a realistic situation. So whether you're a teacher, a parent, young adult who was bored in school, or honestly just someone concerned about adding value, you can integrate design thinking into your everyday life. And we can empower people with this methodology to unleash real creativity at scale instead of looking for just one or two outliers who were fortunate like myself. To make positive impact in the world and to really do disruption Peter Drucker said that the only way to predict the future is to create it. So join me on this movement and let's create a future for youth together.